And now, Chapter 16 of The Last Boy on Earth, Road Trip. I found it! No way, shouted Brady from the other end of the reference room, leaping from the chair and running across. Look, it says right here, Joseph Belanger, Cider Hill Road, Route 43, East Corinth, Maine. President of the Penobscot Ragchewers Ham Radio Society, K1KJV. It says here he has a transmitter and a pretty big vertical antenna, 80 meters. He's equipped with a generator backup. He worked with the Penobscot County Emergency Management Agency, advanced license. Brady didn't say a word in response. Instead, he rushed to the shelves with the atlas and the local area maps. He found the Delorme Atlas of Maine, secured the proper page, and with 100 heartbeats, he had his finger on the road, tracing it from Bangor to East Corinth. Kaylee, it's about a half-hour drive in the Lifeseeker. We can do this. For the past 3 days, they had scoured the library's reference room looking for any information they could find about the location of a local transmitter. The frenzied search for information came only after they had failed in their attempt to set up their own transmitter. Brady had found one the size of a shoebox at a local electronics distributor and brought it to the library. With the library's generator to provide electrical power, the pair thought that all they had to do was string a long wire as an antenna, but 3 nights of experimentation brought them nothing but frustration and failure. They were talking, but no one was listening. What they needed, they decided, was to find a transmitter that was already in working condition with a local power source and a high antenna. With all the information available to them, it was a daunting task. They both needed a crash course in ham radio. They had found a book all about ham radio that was dog-eared and worn. Kaylee chose it, suggesting that books that look like they've been run over by a truck through a mud puddle are usually the best ones, simply because so many people had already used them. When Brady started to read it, he took a chance and asked it a question aloud to see if it, like the library... When Brady started to read it, he took a chance and asked it a question aloud to see if, like the autobiography of Benjamin Franklin, it could talk. To his chagrin, it couldn't. He'd have to read this thing the old-fashioned way. A road trip was in order. Neither Brady nor Kaylee had ever driven 30 miles in one shot. They had no idea what they would need or how long they would be away from the city. They didn't even know if they'd ever return. All they knew was that there was now something very important that they needed to do, and as soon as possible. They listened to Tatiana Savacheva every night at precisely 8 o'clock. Although the broadcast was no longer than a few minutes, she explained that it was because she and her small crew were broadcasting to the entire planet on a number of different wavelengths under limited power. The truth, she spoke, was bleak. Only a few had been able to reach her receiving station during the past few days. What was troubling to Brady and Kaylee was that no one closer to Washington, D.C. had contacted the Ukrainians, and at that distance, they might as well be on the moon. Ultimately, the idea was to meet another person, somehow, some way. There was safety in numbers, and the future of the species would depend upon it. Kaylee reasoned that if they could contact Ukraine, they ought to be able to contact whoever was in Washington. Contact meant uniting. Contact meant people could begin again. They carefully considered their trip. It was possible that they might never return to the city and the library. Kaylee took several books and manuals with them in the Lifeseeker, kitting out a survival library of sorts. In it were books on the repair of electric generators, code books for ham radio operators, simple guides to cooking outdoors, and of course, maps. Brady was in charge of making sure the Lifeseeker was in good running order. He attached the small trailer and rolled the 2 four-wheelers onto it, securing them firmly. There were extra cans of gasoline bungeed to the Lifeseeker's back bumper, and on the trailer, he stowed non-perishable supplies on top of the motorhome and covered it with all blue... Let's start that whole thing over. He attached the small trailer and rolled the 2 four-wheelers onto it. securing them firmly. There were extra cans of gasoline bungeed to the life-seeker's back bumper and on the trailer. He stowed non-perishable supplies on top of the motorhome and covered it all with a blue tarp. He filled the water tank and checked the coolants, oil, and tire pressure. He even made sure to check the spare. If a motorhome was normally made for comfort and attractiveness, the inside of the Life-Seeker looked more like the inside of the original lunar module of Apollo 11. Except for the 2 chairs, the table, and the bunk above the driver's area, the vehicle was positively crammed with items, boxes, and sundry needs. They were traveling not only into the distance, but also into the unknowable future. Like the pioneers in their Conestoga wagons, they both knew that it was entirely possible they would never see the cities of Bangor or Brewer again. They had to prepare for all contingencies, and this meant they'd have to carry a lot of supplies with them. To make sure that they'd have enough fuel to travel, Brady made sure they didn't have 1, but 2, no, 3 siphon pumps. He'd read about redundant systems and thought that they seemed like a good idea. They'd probably have to take gasoline from whatever cars and trucks they came across, as well as gasoline stored in tanks in the ground at stations. The only way to be prepared was to be over-prepared. Brady left Kaylee at the library in the afternoon while he went to visit the general. She was double-checking all the things he had already double-checked. When he arrived at the general's statue, Hugon was already on the statue's shoulder. Brady ambled over to the general and looked at the view that the general always faced. "Beautiful day, General," he said casually. "Yep, it is, Brady." "I did it just like you said," Brady explained. "Yes, you did." "You're not very talkative today," Brady observed. "No, sir," answered the general. "We're leaving for East Corinth. We need to find a transmitter." "So I've gathered from our friend here," said the general, motioning at Hugon with his eyes. "Sir, are you upset with me for something?" The general said nothing in reply. "We'll return, I promise." The general slowly lowered his gaze, and his eyes met with Brady's. "How can you know this? You don't know what lies in store. It is possible, indeed probable, that you shall not return. Once your journey starts, its end is often a mystery. No, don't make promises you cannot keep, Brady. I'll admit that I'm a little shaken by your decision, but I am proud of it, too. I just seem to be growing less statuesque lately, I guess. The more I stare ahead, I've been imagining more. I think I've been feeling emotions. Imagine that. I ask myself who I am. I wonder if I am condemned to stand here for eternity. I long to move about. Behind me is the farm I knew as a boy. How would it be to walk in that back field again where my father taught me how to use my hands? To use these hands again, to meander where my wanderlust allows me to go. I'm growing into the person I represent, whose semblance covers my face. How can this be a good thing, rooted to the spot as I am?" The awkward moment passed slowly while Brady considered the general's point. If the statue was indeed taking on the echoes and ideas of life each day, soon he could be truly alive in every sense of the word, a paralyzed piece of metal forever looking over the distance he could never set foot upon. "I don't know how you'll get up and walk around, but I have a good idea that when the time comes, you'll just do it," Brady said simply. The face of the old general took on a distant look, and he said, nearly beneath his breath, "What did you say?" "I said you'd just do it, that's how." A smile almost broke the face of the old warrior, and his demeanor changed suddenly and for the best. "Thank you, Brady." "What for?" "Well, when I was a boy, my father told me to plow that field, right there behind me. It was full of rocks and stones, and I was just a boy, mind you. I asked him, 'How am I to do this thing?' And he answered, 'You'll just do it, that's how.' And you know what? I did. I did the same thing when I taught myself Greek. I just did it, without anyone's help. You're correct. I shouldn't waste any more time wondering how it will happen, that's all. Until then, I must simply wait." General Joshua Chamberlain then did something he had not done before. He raised his hand and patted the boy on the head. Both of them were stunned and delighted. Brady's laughter filled the air, and the old general himself gave a small chuckle. "I will keep watch for you while you're away." "Are you taking your friend here with you?" asked the general, indicating Hugin. "Well, if he wants to. He's not mine. He's his own boss." "I think he will follow you. He could follow a trail better than most creatures." "Well, what do you say, Hugin? You coming with us?" "Ragnarok," he said, accenting the first syllable. "That's a yes," said Brady. "Good, you're beginning to listen to him. Remarkable bird, this one." Brady told the general about the radio broadcast they'd been listening to from the Ukraine. He understood the idea of radio, for it had been in existence before he died, so it was within his mind. Brady found that other newer inventions were impossible to explain to the statue. "So, there are others. This is promising." "Yes, I concur. By all means, you need to secure a communication with the other survivors if you can. It is your only hope. I mean, how is the young lady, Kaylee?" "Oh, she's fine. She's great, really. She's smart, tough, funny. I'm pretty lucky." "Does she like you?" Brady paused and thought a moment. "I think so. It's hard to tell. I mean, I'm kind of a strange guy at the moment. Sometimes I think I'm a little crazy." "You are who you are. If you pretend to be something other than what you are, she will soon discover your lie, especially if she's as smart as you claim. Better by far to think you a little crazy than a liar. You might be surprised. Remember, she's all alone in this world just like you. All you really have is each other." "Thanks, General. I'll take your advice under serious consideration." "Well, see that you do, Brady. See that you do." The night before leaving for the transmitter in East Corinth, Kaylee busied herself reading the book all about ham radio. In school, she had received the President's Award for Academic Excellence, and she was always a high honor student and was known for her mind as well as for her acerbic, sometimes cutting wit. She knew she was not one to agree with someone just because they were a teacher. She questioned everything and everyone, and some people thought this was off-putting, but no one could deny that she was a scholar with the gift of being able to teach herself from books. Knowledge wasn't hard for her. People were. They always caused her frustration. She couldn't understand why people didn't just do as she expected. Brady had to learn the hard way most of the time, through trial and error and much bad judgment. He admired her focus. Kaylee looked up in frustration at Brady at one point and muttered, "Oh, I'd give my left leg for an hour on the internet to figure this thing out. God, I miss the internet." "Yeah, me too," said Brady, longingly. Silence fell for a few long moments. "I miss fast food," Brady said. "I miss Spotify," Kaylee countered quickly. "Well, I miss the Weather Channel," he said. "You do?" she asked. "Well, it's just one weathercaster. She was really hot." "Yeah, I bet," Kaylee laughed. She looked off into the corner of the room for a moment and said, "I miss chocolate ice cream." "Any ice cream, really," agreed Brady. "A hot soak in the tub and a blow dryer for my hair. I really miss those." "Yep." "You know what I missed?" asked Kaylee. "No, what?" "Some of the people. I know that sounds awful because, everyone's gone. But I only miss some of them. There are some people I don't miss at all. I feel badly about saying it, but there are some people that this world feels better off without." Brady shook his head in agreement and said, "Yeah, I know what you mean. Mean guys, for one. I don't miss them." "Yeah, mean girls, too. They were the worst," said Kaylee. "And my mean old neighbor who always told my mother lies about what I'd done during the day," added Brady. "I don't miss TV like I thought I would. I don't miss video games that much either." "Well, at least we still have music for now," she said. "Yeah, I'm really thankful for music." "And books," she added. "And sleep." "And you," added Brady without thinking. A tender smile broadened across Kaylee's face as she watched Brady's turn red with embarrassment. "Right back at you," Kaylee said. "Yeah, I miss my mom," Brady said as a way of avoiding any further conversation about his previous unintended comment. "Well, where'd your mom work in the hospital?" asked Kaylee. "What's her name?" She was careful to speak in the present tense. "Her name is Ann Smith, and she's a nurse in the emergency room. Here," he said, pulling out a wallet from his back pocket. "I don't really know why I carry a wallet anymore, except maybe it's the photos that I have in here." He pulled a small photograph from one of the plastic sleeves and handed it to her carefully. "That's her. That's my mom." Kaylee looked at the photo for a long time, trying to hold back the words, the thoughts, and the sense of duty she was feeling. How could such coincidences be, she wondered. "I remember her," she said after a time. Brady's face took on a serious edge, and he sat down on one of the heavy old benches. He didn't say a word, but his face pleaded for more information, a word, anything that might help him in his search for his mother. "When my mom got really sick in her office, she told me to stay with her, but she was slipping in and out of consciousness. I was really worried. I left her there and went out to get some cold packs, a washcloth, and some fever reducer. Anything that could help her. But still, everywhere I went, people were either already dead or dying. And even the caregivers were sick. I made it all the way down to the first floor, the headquarters for the Center of Disease Control, and the soldiers guarding the doors. I didn't care. But anyway, when I got there, there weren't any soldiers anymore because they were sick too. The only two people who weren't visibly ill besides me were Dr. Grindle." Kaylee flipped the photo back so that Brady could see it, and she pointed at his mother's face. "And your mom." Brady was frozen. His bones were steel and his mind was ice. More, he thought, say, more. Well, she was moving from person to person, but no matter what she did, she couldn't keep them from dying. When she saw me, she came and asked me what I was doing there. I told her my mom was sick. She gave me some pills and told me to get her to swallow these, and she asked me how I was, and I told her I was fine. And then she told me to prepare for the worst. And any other person, probably would have lied to me, Brady, but your mom told me to prepare for the worst. So I went back upstairs to my mother's office, where she lay on her couch, and closed the door. I made her drink a little Gatorade, and I gave her the pills, and she smiled. I remember that. And then she held my hand." Kaylee was visibly biting back her tears. She had the ability to turn to stone, to seek the rigid and unbendable ways deep within her so that she could make decisions without emotion. But recalling her mother's final moments was beginning to eat away at her deepest center. "I was with my mom when she died. I sat with her a long time. I might have even fallen asleep. When I decided to leave the room, I found myself going back downstairs, looking for the only other living people I knew of in the whole building. But when I got to the first floor, your mother was dead. I'm sorry, Brady. I'm really sorry." Observation mode. Brady ordered himself, nodding his head affirmatively. "Anything else?" "Well, she died helping other people. She was the last one." "Did she die of the virus?" Brady waited on the edge of the question like it was a precipice. Kaylee looked away from him, and then, after considering her answer, she said, "I don't think so, Brady. Right after I saw her, Dr. Grindle attacked me for the first time. I was stunned, but I fought back. I was so freaked out I didn't know what to do. But I saw your mom, and I know that she was untouched by the virus, like you, like me, like Dr. Grindle." They sat in the silence for a long time. Brady stared at the floor, holding his head between his hands and shaking in silence. Kaylee moved next to him on the bench and put her arm around his shoulder and leaned her head against his. He moved his head a little to touch hers, and they shared a long, quiet, desperate hurt. They were both orphans. Their souls had both been shattered. Had the monster killed his mother? Almost certainly. This was too much to bear. Why did Brady feel that in some small way this was his fault? They said nothing else. Kaylee went back to her book, and Brady went down to the children's section where he kept the autobiography of Benjamin Franklin. He needed wise counsel. He also needed to fall apart. Grendel stood in the center of the roof of the hospital. It was the deepest part of night, and the moon had already retreated to the edge of the world, revealing the varied and numberless points of light dancing heel to toe overhead. The great spiral arm of the Milky Way spread out over him, as though welcoming him or admonishing him. It was all the same to him. He had waited long for the strength to endure the bonding that would now most certainly take place. All around him in the air were forming shreds and sheets of evanescent white. He spread his arms in an open posture and began to turn, following the forms as they increased in number and turned about him like an insane tornado. They increased their speed, and with it, a series of high-pitched moans and dark confessions began to be told, as one by one each of the now corporeal forms began to dive into the body of Grendel like swimmers in a black and oily sea. As each ghostly form entered his body, his physical form took on a new appendage, an arm here, a horn there. His fingers grew back, as did a tail and a second mouth above his own original orifice. Grendel's face was racked with pain and pleasure, as though he was dying and being born all in the same moment in space and time, and that somehow they were both the same action. Once the first few forms melded with him, the others on the periphery began to act in like fashion, and an onrush of ancient enemies abandoned their uniqueness to the creature that was Grendel. His body burgeoning with anti-life, his mind a maelstrom of spite and malice, the monster approached his saturation point. He had calculated this partnership with the precision of a scientist. If he had made even the slightest miscalculation, his own personality could be lost, and the body that housed him would be unable to continue its biological processes. So perverse were the forms that now dwelt within him. It took all his strength of arm and heart and brain to control their competing desires within his mind. One of them wanted to kill another, one of them acting as an infection against a third. Under a veritable sea of pain, the creature known as Grendel merged with the final form from the dimensions that swirled about him. Falling to his monstrous knees, he regarded himself through a mask of agony. He was bent, but not broken. It had taken hours for the process to complete, and his resources were nearly spent, but he had transformed. It had happened. All the nightmares and terrors, demons and dark imaginings that had once haunted the dreams of billions came from the darkness next to the nothing and coalesced into the form of Grendel. No longer needed, their hosts all gone down to the earth and death, these imagined monsters had made the decision to throw in their lot with Grendel, prolonging their power and existence even as they were about to be extinguished forever. With no one left to be haunted, terrified, or appalled by them, the nightmares of humanity became a single walking form in a last attempt at survival. As long as there was a single soul to torment, they could survive. Grendel felt the power surging within him. No longer would he be afraid to leave the confines of the hospital. The new world was his, and he could definitely claim it, cleansing it of the remnants of the past, and with it, usher in his own new world. The body beneath it all was stretched to the breaking point, and even now, with the strength of ageless, timeless malevolence lurking like a demon's in his veins, he could hear the faint whisper of a woman and the crystal laughter of a child. Was it his child? Was she his love? Who was he? "No, stop it." A woman's voice that sounded impossibly familiar pleaded with him to stop the conversation that was ending. "It's not your fault, honey. The research was solid. The virus must have mutated. We had no way of knowing this would happen. You can't blame yourself. Or even worse, you can't continue the devastation. What you're doing is unforgivable. The world needs them. Leave them alone. Stop what you're doing and come back to me." And even as he listened, he hardened his heart against this woman's words. Yes, he knew who she was. She was that pathetic doctor's wife, speaking from beyond the river, past the line that separated the living from the dead. She had perished, but he could hear her pleading with her husband to rise up and put a stop to his machinations. It wasn't going to happen, not after he had made the deal with all the devils in the world. No, he willed her to stop talking. He willed himself to stop listening. From somewhere deep underneath, Dr. Grendel heard the voice of his wife. When Grendel awoke, it was well past morning. He made his way down to the ground, no longer through the labyrinth of the hospital, but down the side of the building using steel-strong, retractable claws. These limbs so lithe, these muscles so taut. How could this lead to anything but ultimately ridding himself of the two who plagued his dreams? He hated them even more, powered now by the collective hate of nightmares and fallen dreams. The world frightened him no longer. He would wander it freely and at will. He loped towards the library, not even afraid of the knowledge housed inside any longer. His front arms were longer now, and his hind legs were toned and muscled like a leopard. For his size, he was amazingly fast. Onward he sped, past the houses of the dead, over the charred and barren streets, over wrecks and beyond the beaten paths of the inglorious dead, a Lovecraftian monster, a horror movie lover's dream. And there it was, the library. He pounced up the granite steps to the front door and screamed, "Renamer! Conduit!" His voice was thunder, the first sound of an atomic bomb just before it erases everything in its path. Then he roared out a warning, and grabbing the doors with taloned paws, he ripped the heavy oaken portals apart, sending splinters and debris crashing inward and outward. He thundered into the edifice and sought them out, throwing shelves full of books down upon the floors, hurling plaster busts of long-dead poets and presidents against the wall. Where were they? Why weren't they here? "Where are you?" he bellowed to the empty building. "Where are you?" And the only reply to his question was the voice of a stone gargoyle from Hoboken, New Jersey. The beast couldn't discern from whence it came, but it clearly said in a Jersey lilt, "Too late, you mook. Get out of my library for I whack you. Jeez, they left hours ago. What is it with you, huh? Always a day late and $1 short. Claude." And then Gregoire slipped back into his French accent, and like a demented Maurice Chevalier said, "I have had enough of this. Go away, or I will bite your ankles off, filthy scum." From the Tartarus of his soul, from the hell of his mind, Grendel let loose a scream. He had failed again. End of chapter.